today I'm bringing on a new guest, Peter Astriab, who's the co-host of We Speak Cinema, Cinema,
Yeah.
that podcast on YouTube. He's joined with me to talk killers and the killer.
Yes.
Coming up
Both of
next.
the killers. Yeah. What's up, man? Thank you for having me. This is awesome to be on your podcast. It's an honor, some would say. But yeah, we're doing both killers today. Two birds with one stone.
Yeah, you and I have talked a lot about movies in the past, and you're just a guy that I click with, that I do with very few. When it comes to movies, you're a huge Criterion guy. It's a lot what
Yep.
your podcast is about. I'm into Criterion as well, but I'm not as well versed in it as you are.
Mhm.
But today we're going to talk about two films recently released, The Killer and Killers of the Flower Moon. We've all
Yep.
thought, that was actually your idea that you wanted to talk about both.
Yeah. No, I was
Um,
just like, you know what? We might as well if they sort of came out within the same time period. So let's.
Well, I think we should start with The Killer first because that's
Okay.
out on Netflix, just released. I know it was in theaters a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I thought you were about to plug it like so hard. Like it's out on Netflix. Go stream it. You
Yeah,
know.
no, it's out on Netflix. I just watched it recently.
Yeah.
So, when did you watch it?
I probably watched it about around a week and a half ago.
Around a
Yeah.
week ago.
Yeah.
Now, Peter, tell me what you thought of the film. Let's just get
I
some more.
Yeah, so obviously, this we haven't gotten a real film from David Fincher in a very long time. Like obviously we got Mank a couple years ago, but that was a very specific project that not many people resonated with. They're like, yeah, this is just a passion project of his. But we finally got something from Fincher that was like substantial, sort of back to his old ways. And in a lot of ways, I thought it was technically brilliant. Like he's obviously one of the best people working today in terms of, filmmakers. Um, I love Michael Fassbender. It was so good to see him back as well. So it's kind of a return to form for both of them, I feel. I felt story-wise, I dug the whole, assassin thing and how something goes wrong and how that keeps spiraling and spiraling out of, in a loop, so to say. I just thought it was a little bland. I think like some of his previous, it just didn't live up to the expectations of some of his previous work. I thought that it was engaging, but I still found myself kind of checking my phone sometimes, um, because I don't really know why. Maybe the script wasn't as concise as it should have been, or the use of narration is what kind of bothered me the most, I would say. I don't know how you feel about it. I'll throw it back, to your end to ask your thoughts about it, just in general.
Well, just to comment on the narration, I
Yeah,
think it's used a lot
yeah,
in specifically the first like 10 minutes of the film.
yeah,
And that's where I was like, okay, still going with the narration.
yeah.
As the film went on, it worked for me because I
Yes.
think it had to be used specifically because you don't know really anything about this main character. This
Yeah.
isn't John Wick. You don't know the intentions. And that's what I wanted to
Yeah.
talk about is that the film kind of reminded me of parts of Collateral, Michael Mann's
Mm.
film with Tom
Mhm.
Cruise. His character Drive, a lot like Ryan
Right.
Gosling in
Yep.
Drive. And John Wick is what I thought of too. And I thought of like, what's the difference between The Killer and John Wick? Now, I'm not saying go think John Wick going to this movie. They're completely different films. But
They are very
I'm
different.
just looking at two movies. Like John Wick is more similar to like say like the Equalizer films with Denzel Washington.
Exactly.
I was just saying like what resonates with me with John Wick
Mhm.
that I don't with Michael Fassbender's character. And I overall liked the film. Let me just get that right away.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the film.
Okay.
Um, but the difference between John Wick is we know his character motivations pretty
Yes.
early on, and we get a backstory that's allows us to get on his side and understand
Hmm.
what he's thinking.
Hmm.
With Michael Fassbender, it's completely sped up why he all of a sudden has empathy, as he so denies in the
Right.
film that he can't have empathy here. But he clearly is contradicting that, and he clearly is going against it. And I
Yeah.
found that interesting, and that was clearly done on purpose. This is based off a book. I have not read the book, but
Yeah.
it is not surprising to me that Fincher chose this story because in a way, like if he was a psycho killer, like or an assassin, it would be this guy.
It would be this guy. Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, I totally agree with you there. I think because this came from a graphic novel, I think from France or something, and I'm sure somebody like sent this to him and was like, "Hey, this is like totally right up your alley." And he probably looked at it and was like, "Yeah, I could totally make something of this." But it just feels like I read a comment, I think on Letterbox that somebody said, and they said it just feels like Fincher decided to go out and make a student film during COVID.
Yeah, it was very simple. And
Yeah.
usually his films are very complex, and maybe through rewatch you can find certain things,
Hmm.
maybe with the character motivation that you
Yeah.
didn't get originally, and maybe, because I will say, and I think the benefit of watching it on Netflix is there are things that I caught specifically with like watching it like with subtitles on,
Mhm.
that I would not have caught in the theater,
Yes.
specifically with music choices, the type of music,
Oh
and
yeah.
also like, simple like editing techniques that you always love in a Fincher film. Like, for example, you don't know who the name of this guy is
Right.
the entire movie. It's fake names constantly. And there's a
Yes.
scene midway through where he's renting a car and the guy giving him the car says his last, and they just cut midway through saying the last name because it doesn't matter. And it's
Well,
little
that,
stuff
yeah.
like that.
Right. It's like at what point, like we've gone through it so many times now that
Yeah.
we know the drill. We don't need
Yeah.
to like we get it.
And
Yeah.
I love that's why I love Fincher. And I just think like even though this film isn't one of his best, it's not Seven. This is the same writer that he
Hmm.
collabed with, Andrew Kevin Walker.
Yeah.
They collabed together for Seven. Seven's one of my favorites of all time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's hard, sometimes I think it's kind of rare, and I was nervous Christopher Nolan was gonna have this thing for me where his new film, like I have so much expectations for it. I'm expecting the next Dark Knight, the next
Right.
Inception, and then
Exactly.
it's not that great. And I think that's what happened for people with Tenet specifically. I think people were
Mm.
underwhelmed by that. But
Yeah.
I try not to get into that. Like I wasn't, and we'll talk about Killers of the Flower Moon later, but I wasn't expecting, Goodfellas, Wolf of Wall Street. I was expecting more like The Irishman or like,
Yeah.
something like that. But
Exactly.
a film kind of like that with The Killer, I just needed it to be better than Mank. And
Yeah.
Mank was a film that you said earlier, it was more his father's passion project. And
Mhm.
I think we should be grateful that he's even making a movie in 2023 because it looked like he was going to be stuck with television for a while.
Yeah. I mean, he's one of those mysterious directors. It's like you can always sort of know, like some directors will say, "Yeah, my next project is this," or they're very open about it. But with him, you never really know what's coming next, when it's coming. I wanted to ask you how you feel about stories in general being told in chapters. Does that bother you, or do you enjoy that?
It typically doesn't bother me because I usually think
Okay.
it's for a reason. Like I love when Tarantino does it. um,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
what he does with Inglorious Bastards and
Mhm.
Pulp Fiction, and I so typically, although I will say specifically with this film, it
Mhm.
didn't need to be there. It didn't need to be in the film. Like
Yeah.
I didn't look at it as like, oh, now like this is chapter six. Oh, now I know
Right.
what's gonna
It
happen.
just
So
it almost felt like you were visualizing the heading of like the script, with chapter two. Like it's just giving you the location. Like we know we're moving there. Was it
yeah.
necessary? I don't know. I say this because I had seen, I think it was like 2 years ago, a movie called The Worst Person in the World.
Mhm.
Um,
I haven't seen it.
yeah, that people were like raving about at the time. And I went by myself to go see it. And
Yeah.
it's told in like 12 chapters or something, right? And I believe in the beginning, they're like, this is a story that's going to be told in chapters or like in 12 chapters. So when you're sitting there, you're just going through it, you're like on chapter three, chapter four, you're like, I know I have to get to 12. And it sort of takes me out of it a little bit.
Hmm.
So that's why I brought that up. It didn't necessarily happen with this one. I didn't mind it. Like you said, I don't think it needed to be there. And then the second thing I wanted to say was product placement. What kind of bothers me with this one is that also takes me out of the movie. When you
Hmm.
have an Amazon freaking web page on the side of your
Yeah.
thing and it's just scrolling, it's just
Hmm.
so blatant sometimes that I can't help but be taken out of the story and say, yeah, they paid a lot of money to be in this movie.
With product placement, I think with this one, it didn't bother me so much, mainly because I saw the tools as necessary. And that's just the ones I caught. With Amazon, like, he gets certain tools, he orders them, and then he's patient with it. He's like, okay, well, what's the typical place someone would get something like that pretty quickly? Amazon
Sure.
is the thing.
Yeah.
As well as like you're seeing a lot of the rent-a-cars, like Enterprise and like stuff like that. Like, I'm seeing, and when you watch a hockey game, like Enterprise is
Yeah,
everywhere.
it's everywhere. Yeah.
So I can understand that, but part of the story is him renting cars.
Mhm.
I didn't catch all the product placement, so I'm not gonna go. I
Yeah.
wonder if was there a phone, because there's a lot of phones that he smashes. So
He smashed so many phones. Like, oh my God. Obviously, there was McDonald's in the beginning, right? Because he's
yes,
outside of that.
McDonald's. Yes, yeah.
But I don't know. It just, I don't
Although
enjoy
I
that.
kind of found it interesting the way he ate his McMuffin. Like I kind of like when movies show psychos
But doing
like
something just a
doing
little off.
something ordinary people do, but just a little off, and he takes the bread out and stuff like that. I just find that
Yeah.
funny. Or like when he eats the hard boiled eggs
Oh, yes. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the car and he drinks the Starbucks coffee.
Yeah.
Starbucks was
Mhm.
another one, right? Starbucks was
Right. It
another
was in there. Yeah.
product
Yeah.
placement.
The more,
So that's funny. Like I didn't notice it at first, but that's a good point that you brought
yeah.
up.
I mean, you don't even think about it because the ones that you just mentioned, like I forgot because some of them go unnoticed, like you said, but
Mm,
that one was literally on the side of the screen. Like it took up part of the frame. So now you're taking one of the products of the story and literally placing it on our screen as if we are controlling or seeing what he's doing. So
mm.
that's why I made it a little bit more obvious. But that's what I had to say about that. Um, yeah, that was kind of my points on it. I thought it was great. I like what you said that it just had to be better than Mank, right?
Yeah.
I'm happy that Mank exists. If I ever want to delve more into that Citizen Kane story, it's always there for me. But as a from a sheer entertainment point of view, I enjoyed myself with it. I would have had a better time in theaters, but like you said, with the subtitles, you caught things that you might not have in other places. So,
I'm a huge proponent of supporting films in theaters.
mhm.
Um, I did not. I was very busy at this
Yeah,
point when it was in
I couldn't.
theaters. So I did wait to Netflix, although I typically don't like doing that. Like with Knives Out last year, I was going to Netflix. I went to the theater to see that.
Nice.
Um, there's just some other things I wanted to talk about with this film in particular.
Mhm.
Something that stands out is the hypocritical behavior of the killer and
Yes.
of Michael Fassbender's character, who by the way is great, and it's great to see him back. I haven't seen Next Goal Wins. It's not getting great reviews,
Yeah,
which is
apparently it's
like,
not getting good.
and
Yes.
I think people are just sick of Taika at this
That's what
point.
I think it is too. I
I think
think
they're
so.
just tired of his humor and the silliness,
Yeah.
and he maybe has gone a little too much.
It was
I
like
was a big
something that
Taika,
was cool at one point and now has just
and
sort of,
now it's kind of been
yeah.
passed. And I don't think that's just a Thor Love and Thunder thing.
No.
Um, specifically with Fassbender, his killer also has a certain vulnerability. And that's
Mm,
what I really liked about the narration. As it went on and he's repeating things in his head
yes.
constantly right before he makes a decision on whether to kill someone or not.
Right.
But like obviously we're not thinking that like, oh, are we gonna kill this person or not? But we all have that connection to somebody where we're trying to remember something of how we're supposed to behave, how we want to behave.
Hmm. Hmm.
And he obviously has this goal, this passion to be elite at what he does. And in
Yeah.
order to do that, you see a lot of human stuff too, like his heart rate, like time
Right.
his heart
I thought
rate.
that
Like
was really cool, actually.
he's not just John Wick, do, right?
Yeah.
He's
Right.
got like a human side to him. Is like, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, killing a person is,
Yeah,
high
exactly. And when
intensity.
when you brought up the John Wick thing, I meant to say, like, I once the third and fourth one came out, you start going to theaters and you know what to expect, right? I
Mm,
go to John Wick movies because I know that the choreography is going to be incredible, and
yep.
I just want to see what is the next coolest way that he's going to kill somebody,
Mm,
right? And how
yeah.
many people are about to be sacrificed for the
Yeah.
sake of this movie. And I like that distinction that you're making here because he does have that, the stick to the plan. And there's almost a nervousness that we get. Um, and it's through the narration because I guess with a character like John Wick, it's more so kind of expressed through other characters, maybe like because they're all, we're jumping from scene to scene with different people. But this one is, I mean, Michael Fassbender is pretty much the center of focus the entire time, and you
Mm,
don't realize it's a character study. That's what it is. And I think they've dove pretty deep into it with all the different locations and, like you said, all the technology that was used. Yeah.
I just think as a character, my flaws with it are simply I think the character was just a bit underwritten.
Mm.
And I think you talked about that earlier. Just not enough was told for why we should really 100% care about this quest that he's on.
Right.
You
Right.
know, like that, it's interesting to see him in certain scenes. There's very like entertaining moments, especially like when he's going up against, the meathead guy, like that dude, it's huge. And he,
Dude, that
and
was
it's funny, like,
crazy.
because he's a Pilates yoga guy. They're going against weightlifters and
Yeah.
creatine guys.
Hmm.
And seeing that fight, seeing like that's the one time where you feel like, oh, his life is like at stake here.
Yeah. Yeah. You got the
And
dog as
there's
well, just chasing him. That's
yeah,
another.
yeah, yeah. And there's just a lot of dark humor that I like too, that I I like in Fincher films.
Mm.
Just this dark stuff, like when he ends up killing the prostitute,
Yeah.
and he just goes, fuck. Like just that whole thing,
That's
you
all it
know?
has to be. Like that's
Yeah.
you know,
Just a
you
little
were
line like that.
yeah, you relate to somebody that I mean that what would you say if you were in that position, right? So you have to make it somewhat relatable.
Mm,
Um, and that's how Fincher does it. That's that those short, cruel, humorous moments. Yeah, I
mm.
agree.
This was my third most anticipated of the year. Is it top three films of the year for me? No, not necessarily. I wouldn't rule it out for top 10. I wouldn't. I think it's great. Before we move on to Marty,
Yeah.
I think it's just kind of awesome and cool that within a year we've gotten a film from James Cameron. We're gonna get Napoleon, Ridley
Yep.
Scott, coming up
List
soon.
them out. List them out, bro. List them out.
Yeah, David Fincher,
Yeah.
Martin Scorsese,
Mhm.
and the only one I guess is missing is and Spielberg, right, with Fablemans,
Mhm. Mhm.
last year. Like
Yeah.
I just think
We-
that's awesome. We got a big Tom Cruise blockbuster. Christopher Nolan's film came out.
Right.
Like
Right.
it's just like what are the odds like in a year like those that many
That
legends?
everybody, yeah, you look forward to stuff like that. I always look forward to these moments, and I'm a big Oscars person. So when it comes to in terms of Oscars, like finally within the 2020s, we're gonna have a year that's actually interesting. Like the other
Yeah,
years were, but they were also hit by COVID. This is the first one that feels like okay, now we're back on the trend of
yeah,
making
movies are back, right?
like pretty much like we've been saying movies are back, movies are back. Like I kind of started Top Gun Maverick prior to that a little bit, but
Mhm.
now it's like, we're gonna start getting back ramping up to where it should
Yeah.
be.
And Barbie and Oppenheimer definitely helped that,
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely.
I though I am worried, just to sidetrack before we go into Martin
Hmm.
Scorsese's film, but just a quick side note with The Killer and Martin Scorsese's film Killers of the Flower Moon going to Apple TV, right? The
Mm,
Killer is obviously on Netflix. Streaming is very popular even for these big filmmakers.
yes.
And it's concerning when you see what Warner Brothers just did with their Looney Tunes
That's right.
movie. They just cut it completely. Stuff like that. I don't like that. And
Yeah.
Chris Stuckman said it in his video.
Yeah, I
Um,
watched it. I saw.
yeah, where Hush is a great film and it's just not on. You can't get it anywhere,
Hmm.
and that scares me. So I hope in. I think movies. I think people want more original stuff.
Yes.
I think you're seeing that with Oppenheimer. Um, and I think you're seeing with the comic book films how they're just down.
Mhm.
I think you're seeing that. Who
Yeah.
knows if studios will make the right read on that, but I think that's
Maybe,
why.
maybe. I don't know if it was in the Chris Stuckman video that you referenced, but uh somebody said that I think it was him because he said he's worried that because the Marvel films and comic book movies are going down, right? That's the main source of income for a lot of the theaters nowadays.
Yeah.
And so how do you make that, switch to still want to be supporting original content, but still seeing the box office flow, right? Like
Yeah.
Barbenheimer was a thing because we made it a thing.
Exactly. And I hope we continue that though.
Yeah.
I think here's what I think is interesting is like we still don't know. There's questions, right?
Hmm.
Personally, I think the reason why people aren't going to Marvel films anymore is because they focused on quantity over quality. They're just not as good at it anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the reason people have stopped going. Not
Hmm.
necessarily because, they're sick of going to the movie theater,
Right.
but mostly that. Once they get good films that are highly marketed and like, oh my God, this movie, and then I think people will be more open to going to the theaters
Yeah.
for that reason. I think that's certainly a possibility. So you can look at it, the glass, half full way or half empty,
Exactly,
depending
exactly.
on what it is.
I think we know of somebody who would have a lot to say about Marvel and the state of cinema right now, and I think that's the director of the next movie that we're going to talk about.
Yeah. So Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. Tell me your thoughts because you saw it. I saw it before you, but
Yeah,
yeah, I saw it
yeah,
in
I
theaters and you did too,
same.
right?
Yeah, I saw it a couple days after you, and it was so that's my first Scorsese movie in theaters, which is nuts. Like
Yeah.
feel like you take things into perspective. Like we're still young, but we've this guy has been making movies for forever. It feels like, and so to be this have sit because The Irishman came out on Netflix and all that stuff.
Mhm.
It was like a limited release in the city. Like you couldn't really. It was pretty much a Netflix thing.
Yeah.
First one in the theaters, great experience. It's a long movie, man. But when you prep for something that long, it's okay. And especially if you have somebody like him making a movie, I was engaged throughout the entire thing for the most part, I would say. It was an engaging story. It had a lot to say, as we know. I thought that the budget was definitely seen on the screen. I mean, it's like $200 million or something. It's ridiculous.
Mm. A lot of it
Um,
went to Leo.
um,
Yeah,
I'm sure it did, and you know what? Deserved
I
because
think I think he got paid 40 million for it.
Jeez, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was great. But yeah, the budget, you can see it like when the first time you entered the Oklahoma landscape and the prairies, it's just, you can tell the amount of money that went towards making the movie, and it looks gorgeous. People have been, what's it called? Have been showing the shot of like the fire, like as the one from the movie is like the cinematography where people are like shoveling in the ground or something. It's awesome, and it's interesting that Scorsese decided to tackle this subject now, and it's coming from him. It's also really interesting, right? Because he's a white guy coming into a Native American reservation, saying like, "Hey, I want to do your movies." And I recently watched an interview with him where he said, so Spielberg actually just interviewed him for Apple or for DGA or something, and Marty was like, "Yeah, when I approached them, they were obviously hesitant. They didn't really want to trust me because they had seen like maybe Goodfellas or one of those mafia movies, and like, well, what's this guy planning to do?" And Marty wanted to give a copy of Silence, his 2016 movie, to the great granddaughter of Ernest Burkhart, and she was like, "Oh, I'd seen that movie." So that was the first sign of trust that maybe they would be able to trust him as a filmmaker to make this film. And man, did he really like work with them to make sure that everything was as almost as neutral as possible, and from the story of Ernest and Molly, of their relationship, which I loved. I don't want to get into too much because I want to ask what you thought about it, but I will say it's I based off the first watch, I prefer The Irishman over this film, and I think there was one thing missing for me from an emotional standpoint that I'll get into in a second, but I want to ask what you thought about it.
So this was number two most anticipated for me.
This is probably number. Well, okay, so Dune got pushed back, right? That was one for me.
Yeah. Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That
So,
stinks. Yeah.
yeah,
That's another one. Denis Villeneuve is a great
right.
director, filmmaker. Here's what I took away from it. Everyone is great. Lily Gladstone is great. Robert De Niro, awesome to see him back in a good movie, right?
Hmm.
Ever since
Yeah,
The Irishman. I know he was great in The Irishman, but he's really good here.
he's
Uh,
very good here.
and he
Like,
plays a different character than he's played. Just a
definitely,
very interesting villain. Leo is unreal to me. And
he's
like
so good.
I feel like so many people were kind of brushing that off. That was the
Hmm.
first thing because when I saw early reviews of this film, I was like, everyone's praising Lily Gladstone, and she's great. She's
She is
great.
good.
I'm
Yeah.
not here to like downplay it or anything,
Hmm.
but a lot of people were just kind of like, and Leonardo DiCaprio is also really good in the movie. I'm
Yeah.
like, he's
Yeah.
fucking unreal here. I
Yeah.
have never seen him play. This is like, I heard someone say, um, I heard someone say that it's kind of a mix between like Rick Dalton and like, some other characters he's
Mhm,
played, just
mhm.
kind of like that the dummy personality. But no,
Right.
he's like full on dumb here.
Yeah.
And he just, you completely forget he's freaking Jack from Titanic, or
Exactly.
like Jordan
Exactly.
Belfort in Wolf of Wall Street, or
Hmm.
in Django,
Right.
right? Like he's so damn unbelievable in this film. And that scene, obviously spoilers.
Yeah.
I should have said this at the beginning of the film.
Please spoiler. Well, that's too late now.
Spoilers ahead. Don't worry, I'll put something like
Yeah.
spoilers ahead and whatever. But with him, like that scene where he cries after he finds out his kid died,
Mm.
that's
Oh
the
man.
most memorable part for me.
Yeah.
With his character, just him watching him. He should be nominated for Best Actor. I don't think he'll
Absolutely.
win. I think, the three shoo-ins for me for Best Actor are Paul Giamatti in The Holdovers,
Hmm.
Cillian Murphy for Oppenheimer, and
Yeah.
Leo for, and I think Cillian Murphy's gonna win. I just think
It would
that's
it
the
would be
star of
nice,
that film.
right? But it would also be nice for Leo to win an Academy Award for something that we actually think he should win one for.
Yeah, he's insane, and
Yeah.
he's so good in this. My issues with Killers of the Flower Moon, you know, typically I had this feeling when I left Oppenheimer. Like
Mm.
I thought Oppenheimer when I first left, I thought it was a little too long. I watched it again, and I thought it was perfectly paced. Kind of, it
Yeah.
reminded me the way it was edited. Kind of reminded me of like The Social Network, going back to Fincher.
Yes.
The
Okay.
way
Yeah.
like each dialogue felt intense, the way it
That's
goes
a
back
that's a
in
top four
time.
movie for me. Top four.
Yeah, like the way that film goes back in time, present time,
Mhm.
like, and
Yes.
that's what Oppenheimer basically does. And each dialogue scene matters, and you got to pay
Hmm.
attention. So I thought Oppenheimer was perfectly placed. Killers of the Flower Moon, I knew it was too long when I didn't feel like seeing it a second time in theaters.
Wow, that's a really good
So
point.
so like I think like I was thinking like, you know what, I probably need to see it again, and you know what, I will see it again, and I
Yeah.
will catch some things.
Hmm.
Did it need to be that long? Probably not.
No.
And I
But
think
this
that's
is
the
what
biggest turnoff from people.
everyone, that's just something that you hear constantly. Everyone's gonna say, "Yeah, it's too long. It's too long. It's too long." Like
Yeah.
we get it,
And I'm
and
not
yeah,
one of those guys. I'm really not one of those guys. And
yeah,
I would
I
gladly
would say the
watch this
same
film
thing.
again.
Right, but like you said, for Oppenheimer, that was really memorable for me. I wanted to get my butt back in the theater for that experience. That's
Yeah.
like something I'm always going to remember for the rest of my life, seeing
Mm.
Oppenheimer in
Yeah.
theaters.
Mm.
This one was more like it had more historical importance and weight to it, but it didn't have the the grandeur of Oppenheimer, even though we're set in like the 20s in this massive budgeted, Western essentially.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to bring up is the point. I mean, like you said, Leo is exceptional. He is so good in this thing, and it's so hard. Well, I'd rather say it's so impressive for an A-list actor to still portray another character and still lose themselves in it, right? Because like we could have just gotten a nobody. Scorsese could have found a different person who could have played this character, and they probably would have been pretty good. Um, but we kind of lose Leo here, which is lovely to see, and that's why I think he should definitely be nominated. My one thing with the film that I wish could have been a little better was I while I love that we got some of the story from Lily and like their relationships perspective, I didn't feel there was one scene where because everybody was praising Lily Gladstone saying she's amazing, but I needed one scene where it's just her and her family discussing the crazy shit that's going down.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and her, because what the story is it's the tragedy of her still loving him
Mm-hmm.
and not being able to let that go and believe that he's a bad person. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel that from her perspective as an audience member, I didn't get that, like, but I still love him and you guys are wrong. And I'm going to prove you wrong. And he's not a bad person. And then that would have made it that much more tragic. Like
Yeah.
that's the end where she's asking him, did you know what you were injecting me with?
Yeah.
And he just said instant. Like it still hurt. Like it gives me chills sometimes to think about it, but it could have been more impactful if we had a little bit more from like the Osage perspective. I don't know. That's just what I got from it.
Yeah. And, she's very stoic. She's very emotionless, and many times,
Yeah.
as I think that was the direction. So I think she did a good job. It's just I just thought Leo wasn't getting enough praise for the
Fair.
incredible performance that I was witnessing. And obviously Robert De Niro is really good.
He's
Um,
so good too. Yeah.
some things quickly I liked was it was nice to see Jesse Plemons not play a dirtbag. Like it was just nice to see him.
Yeah.
Like in fact, when I saw him in the trailer. I don't really like to really pay attention to the trailers because it ruins the film for me.
Mhm. Mhm.
So when I saw that Jesse Plemons is like a cop or like an FBI agent,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, it was an FBI CIA. I don't know.
I think FBI. FBI.
Yeah,
Well, it's
FBI.
like before. It's like the creation of the FBI, right? So.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's funny because when you talk about emotional moments, I thought the ending was a little anticlimactic.
Mm.
And I love that. To me, the thing that like made it watchable was you see Martin Scorsese,
Yeah, that was
and
fucking
that's
awesome,
really
dude.
cool. It's like
That was
awesome.
so cool.
But
Yeah.
part of me wonders if like I could have just seen these emotional moments of her officially deciding to leave him. And honestly, that could have been another 30 minutes in itself or another 15 minutes. And
Yeah.
instead, like I was like, it's strange to have a 3.5 hour movie and still leave it kind of being like, but there was a little bit more to tell, but you
Yeah.
be
Right.
stuck
Isn't that
with
so
certain
strange?
storylines. And
Yeah.
that was what was a tiny bit frustrating about the ending for me personally.
Mhm. I understand. So I watched that interview, and Scorsese talked about the ending and his choice there, and because he was like, that's what people back then like with the radio, or it was like something with the creation of radio, or like how they would tell those stories. But I agree with you. Like this story had such a weight to it that I was almost offended with how it ended.
Yeah.
Like I was like sitting there, I was like, what the like, why are we doing this right now? Like I thought there was such a poignance to what had just happened between the two of them and their relationship sort of ending. And then we get like a narrated bit from the last line that Scorsese says is obviously like it hurts. He says something like and because if you look up the history, there's no mention of the murders, right? And you're like, damn, that's tough.
Yeah.
But it seemed like they were making a farce of the whole thing, like it was some sort of joke.
Mm.
And it didn't, that was what messed with me a little bit. I wonder how I'll feel about it the next time I sit down and decide to watch, spend another 3.5 hours with it, because I think I'll appreciate it more. But I don't know, something just didn't sit well with me. Like I love the camera shot at the end, over them and they're in the circle, and how it's almost saying that history repeats itself and these things are still happening today, and but whatever, but yeah, it wasn't perfect. It
Mm.
wasn't a perfect film. I think for what he had tried to achieve, it's masterful, right? Like who else is doing this shit? He's like, he just had his birthday the other day. Like he's
Yeah.
81, I think. So
Yeah, it's very Marty, it's a source material that is different, but in the way Scorsese tells the story, it's very similar to a lot of his older films, like The Irishman,
Mhm.
Wolf of Wall Street, Casino, Goodfellas in particular.
Yeah.
All those characters, all those stories end badly or like just like lonely, alone, and
Mhm.
horrible. So not all the characters, because I knew some people weren't a fan of Leo's like the way that kind of was turned, and
Mhm.
if he's a good husband or like if he cared for his wife, then why would he do that? I understand that, but sometimes it's hard when your uncle has all that power and it's complicated. And I think I felt that enough for Leo. Like I
Yeah.
understood like what he was doing was terrible, but he's this stupid man. But you could also tell that he loved his wife and his
Mhm.
kill and
Right.
his kids. And
Right.
you see as the film goes along, especially when the house blows up, you see him look at all that debris, and you're like, what is
Yeah. Yeah.
happening?
Yeah.
Um, but then he'll get in rooms with Jesse Plemons, and then he'll be like, I don't know nothing, and then, like
Yeah.
stuff like
He's like,
that, right?
I have no idea.
Um, yeah, but yeah, as far as that goes, like it's very similar, like I said, to other Scorsese films in that way.
Mhm.
To me, it's around The Irishman. I don't know. I think me with Killers and The Irishman is very similar. I enjoy The Irishman. It's probably The Irishman a little bit more for me. But I still think this film was enjoyable.
Yeah,
Again, I wasn't expecting Marty to bring out his best film. I still think it's important that we see movies like this, um,
absolutely.
to go and support them. I do worry sometimes with the length, if it was just more bloated more than
Hmm.
necessary. Because
Hmm.
sometimes a film needs to be cut. Sometimes it needs to be cut.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
was a huge turnoff to specifically the younger audience, specifically people who do love Marvel movies, the way he talks about Marvel movies. And then you go to see his 3.5 hour. Like I saw some dude on I forget the podcast where it was, but he basically said it was like Martin Scorsese's films are like a chore to get through.
Oh, I
And,
saw
and,
that.
I, and
Yeah.
I was just like, dude,
Come on.
you sound
Come
so
on, man.
disrespectful right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, what did you think quickly of um who's the lawyer? Just played the way.
Oh, Brendan Fraser?
Brendan Fraser. What did you think of
Dude,
Brendan
that was
Fraser's like
I was like,
ridiculous
yeah, I
intensity?
was kind of I was like, what is happening right now? Like he just showed up like literally like 3 hours into the movie,
Mm,
and you're just making like the way he was yelling, it felt like he was in the wrong movie. Like it felt
yeah,
so comedic. I thought I was about to see like My Cousin Vinny or something
yeah.
like in this courtroom. It took me aback. I don't know.
I was like, because I heard some rumblings that Fraser's a little weird in this, and by the way, I love Brendan Fraser, so I just
Yeah,
blanked his name for a
awesome.
second. I don't know
Great guy.
why. He's in the movie for just a little bit. That's why.
Yeah.
But the way he's just like, "Are you like
I was like, what?
to betray your family?" Like just that whole thing is just
Oh.
and he's also like still looks like the whale.
Yeah, a
Like
little bit. Yeah, a little
he's not a
bit.
fat guy. So
Yeah, no.
he's just I guess I don't he gained some weight for I don't know.
One scene really quickly I wanted to point out was when Leo and De Niro are in the car and they're like, he was supposed to do it through the head. He's a fucking idiot.
Yeah,
I thought that was so funny, just like that even like 1 minute comedic scene of just like because when
yeah,
he shoots him through the car, you're like, are you kidding me right now? Like
yeah,
that doesn't look like a like he killed himself. That's not what that looks like. It looks like a
yeah.
murder.
I think we come to the realization that specifically with both of these films, there's a lot to like. There's a
Yes.
lot to enjoy.
Hmm.
And we had tremendous expectations for these filmmakers and these films.
Yes.
Ultimately, I feel like we thought they could have been a little bit better
Yeah,
in
I
certain
think
ways.
so.
I think with Killers, the runtime probably a little shorter. I saw some people complaining about how just real quickly
Hmm.
this story like you kind of know it's that Robert De Niro is the bad guy instantly. And do we really need 3.5 hours for that? I mean, sometimes with Scorsese films, we know how usually it turns out.
Yeah.
We knew in Goodfellas they were probably all going to get caught. Like
Right.
and Wolf of Wall Street, we knew Jordan
Exactly.
Belfort was going to
Exactly.
suffer the consequences for his actions. Sometimes you just want to see how it transpires.
Right.
And then with the killer, specifically, I think the fact that this character is so patient and precise in how he does things, it
Mhm.
actually kind of suffers for the viewer because you
Yeah, a
see he
little bit.
addresses it in the beginning of the film. It's like it's you got to be patient and
Yeah, all that
he's
stuff.
just
Yeah.
kind of just laying there and talking to us.
Mhm. Like loop. It's
And
like
I ultimately think that suffers just a tad bit from a pacing standpoint.
100%.
Final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Both great movies. Still directors at the top of their game. Definitely worth checking out. It's so important to cinema, as Marty would say. I would say Killers of the Flower Moon is like a 4.5 out of 5 for me. The Killer was more like a 3.5 out of 5.
Yeah, I don't really do ratings on my channel because I
Oh my
think
God,
so
I'm
many
so
people do
sorry.
ratings. No, no, no,
Scrap.
no. It's great that you do. I want your opinion. I'm just I
Yeah,
typically
yeah,
just
yeah.
kind of give my thoughts. But
Yeah, yeah.
tell my audience where they could find your stuff.
So you can find us at We Speak Cinema on YouTube. We basically do this. We talk about movies, talk about Criterions, do Criterion Blu-ray hauls and all that good stuff. So if you're interested, check us out. It's me and another co-host. Yeah, thank you for having me. This was awesome. I love talking, about this stuff. So
We're gonna have you on again in the future, man. Or I'm gonna have you on. I say we. The
yeah,
royal we.
yeah,
It's Big
yeah, right,
Lebowski, the
exactly,
royal we.
exactly. I appreciate it.
Awesome having you, Pete. Great talking
Thank
to you.
you.
Have a good one,
Yeah,
man.
take care. like, or whatever the case is.
Yeah, I guess in this case, it didn't really bother me so much.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, what is wrong with you? Oh, my bad. Fucking idiots. We got to cut that
The
out. All
editing,
right.
the editing.
Well, editing,
Keep the thought process.
such morons. I told them I'm recording in here and they're fucking come down here.
Okay, product
Anyway,
placement.